Hello and welcome back to the future of retail marketing from the Retail Bulletin. If you've come back again, this is session number 4. So if you've been with us all day, thank you so much for sticking with us. We've had some brilliant audience participation today. If you're just joining us for this panel alone, you're also exceptionally welcome. This is our last session of the day. It's been our comeback after our summer recess, and we've had brilliant panels and one-to-ones throughout the day, and so I hope you've enjoyed it. And what's coming up hopefully is no exception at all. So I'm looking forward to introducing our 2 panelists in just a second. This is webinar number 4, UX and data-driven decision-making in marketing. Big title to unpack there, and I'm sure we've got lots to talk about over the next 40 minutes or so. I'll moderate the session, and I'm here to make sure that if you ask questions as the audience, that we get them answered for you. So whichever device you're using, somewhere on your screen, there will be a Q&A button. Please do use it. You're very welcome to ask questions at any time. And my promise to you is any question that gets asked will be answered. I'm Darren, I'll moderate the session. And for various things I do, I have a consultancy called Williams Harding. I'm the chairman of a men's skincare brand called Scrubbed. Check it out. And I am the non-exec chairman of a fabulous music PR business called Liberty as well, which is a recent appointment. So yeah, lots happening, and the Retail Bulletin hire me for these things, and please keep hiring me. It's very much appreciated. So last one of the day, let's find out who our panel are. So over to you first, Desi, if I may. Hello, sir. We've worked together before. Welcome back. Tell us about you, please.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks for having me back. It's great to be with you guys again. So I'm working with a company called Victorinox. I'm the senior UX manager there. So I also look after the UX practice for the whole of Victorinox and make sure that all of our customers, when it comes to our digital touch points, can experience the very best experience possible. Now, we're going through a massive digital transformation, and for us, it's really not a buzzword, where we are seeing transformations and migrations and evolutions, not just on our storefront, our website, but also our processes on the back end, as well as our technical architecture. And also how we're able to find ways in which we can reduce the pain points, reduce that friction in every aspect, foreground and background of our service line. So it's a privilege to be able to represent Victorinox today and be with you guys.
A pleasure to have you with us as well. Thank you, sir. Good to see you again. Andrea is actually over in Houston right now. She lives in San Francisco, but she's in Houston, and she's currently hiding out in a hotel after there was a hurricane there yesterday. So extra thanks for still joining us today, and welcome, and tell us about you, Andrea.
Thank you for that, Darren. Hi, everyone, and thank you to the Retail Bulletin for having me at the Future of Retail Marketing. I am Andrea Brown. I've worked in advertising for about 15 years across entertainment, lifestyle, and retail industries. I now lead the tech B2B West Coast practice at Google, and we primarily partner with large enterprise marketers from Salesforce, Adobe, IBM, to web services and cloud services, and a host of others. I'm really excited to talk with you, Darren, and Desi about digital marketing maturity, and honestly, just the emergence that I'm seeing and our team is seeing in app and social and B2B marketing in particular.
Well, we have got tons to talk about by the sounds of it, Andrea. So thank you again for joining us, especially on the back of such circumstances. And you may see just on the edge of the camera here, I was being pestered under my desk, and someone has finally made an appearance today. So my furry friend Scamp is just coming to say hello. She'd offered to moderate, but it probably wouldn't run that smoothly. So I thought she'd just say hello. She hopefully will behave herself. She hasn't appeared for any of the panels, and so she's obviously wanting to not miss out on the last one. But yeah, she's here too, and hopefully she won't cause too much disruption. In this virtual world we've been living in, if we do have people running across the screen or little ones, furry friends and so on, partners, etc., please don't worry, we're all used to it by now. So let's kick things off. So Desi, I'm going to come to you first, if I may, to get this subject going. And audience, don't forget, please ask questions at any time. So Desi, UX teams, marketing teams, they can sometimes be quite siloed. Do they need to work together to avoid miscommunication regarding data and customer experience? The answer is probably obvious, but what's your view?
Yeah, the answer is obvious, but I'll tell you why the answer is obvious. Really good question, Darren. Well, first of all, it's a total waste of resources when you have two teams doing the same thing or similar things, which is in effect a duplication of efforts, right? So this is one major factor as to why it's important two teams align and work together. But both teams, what they're doing, they're essentially designing customer journeys, but from different perspectives. And we kind of already know that, but let's explain that for a little bit. Well, marketing teams I've come across in my career within the industry, in interaction with those various different teams across various companies I've had the privilege to work for and represent, is that they've historically built the customer view based on general market research. Historically, not all, but historically. But then there's a smaller percentile focused on perhaps a detailed level, but a much larger percentile which gives you that very general overview, which creates a natural problem. Now, what that problem is that it doesn't tell us who the customer is, why they do things, perhaps their emotion throughout various different touch points that they have with the business. And it doesn't expose information about the customer across the different channels a company may have. Most organizations have done great research, but they've focused on a single channel. And that's where there's an issue, because on the other side, it's not all good and it's not all bad. You've got UX teams, some UX teams, especially ones that are fledgling teams or growing teams, and they haven't quite established or figured out that, you know, that side of the process for them. They can be great professionals too, do amazing work, but then their focus is entirely digital. So then we have the issue of being data focused instead of data aware. Data aware, taking into consideration the contextual experience and the contextual layers or pillars of channels. So that's why it's so important to be able to make sure that you can have that alignment. But why am I really making that point? And it's because I would say the teams depend on different types of data, but those different layers or types or levels of detail of data expose different things. But when you triangulate them together, they expose a much more complete picture. Not the most complete picture, because our picture will never, ever be complete when we take data, because we take it from a period of time, a moment in time. And from that moment to what's live, things always change. A great example is what happened pre-COVID, and then a week later, when lockdown happened across the world. Behavior changed, attitudes changed, people panicked. All of a sudden, spikes in e-commerce sales happened, and everyone thought the websites that they had were going great, but that wasn't the case. There's always been a false flaw, and there've been lots of tests to identify why that's been the case and how behavior had been affected as a result of the emotional, mental, and psychological stresses upon each individual, depending on what they've really had to do or how they've had to interact. So it's a long answer, I know, but ultimately it's both teams do need to work together to avoid that misalignment. And when they can share the different perspectives of data that they have or that they've been able to research, or even align their efforts so that it's not duplicated, then both teams can talk harmoniously to the wider business. It enables them to, again, be harmonious, sing from that one hymn sheet so they can achieve the goals they need to quicker. It makes things a lot more efficient as well when it comes to that side of the process. But I mentioned triangulation. That's really, really important, because if we don't triangulate our data, that's multiple layers on top of each other. Don't just take one version or one view and go, right, this is what our customer looks like. And again, that's when you have two departments working in silos. That's what can happen. But when they work together and you've got layers of data, you're able to see the different modes, behavior, touch points, and how that affects the service line, the foreground and the background of what happens with a customer, and how we fulfill their needs or requests, and how they feel when they interact with those touch points across all our channels.
Well, I mean, there's a lot in there, Desi, as well. So thank you so much. It's fine. And great content. So audience, if you want to unpick any of that or clarify any of that as well, please don't hesitate to ask Desi further questions and I will field them to him. But thank you, sir. Great start. Andrea, we've seen huge growth recently in social and apps in B2B. What's driven that, do you think?
I think overall we've started to see this shift towards the consumerization of B2B, right? So that trajectory, coupled with the accelerated growth that Desi spoke to in terms of that growth we're seeing amid COVID, I think have all been factors in the growth that we're seeing with social and apps. I think additionally, the size of the buying committee who are making these purchase decisions has grown tremendously. So I think when we looked at our latest research that Google conducted with Ipsos as compared to 2018, we found that the average number of influencers on B2B purchase decisions tripled in just 2 years.
Wow.
And so roughly half of B2B decisions involve now 8 or more people. So I think that itself is resulting in a complete democratization of decision making. And so it's no longer just the C-suite or the IT person that's involved. I think today's B2B purchase decision making are really being influenced by cross-functional teams across your organizations and at all levels of the organizations. And I think when you think about that, you really have to meet each person where they are at all points of their consumer journey and how they decide to engage. And so there's a lot more that I hopefully we'll get into, but I think that really is the crux of why we're seeing the tremendous growth that we have as of late.
That's the,
go on.
Sorry, Desi, I'm not jumping in there, but Andrea, you made an excellent point with regards to engaging with customers at different points, right? Because one of the things that we found, no doubt, teams within your organization found the same, is that customers have different levels of expectations depending on where they are in the journey and what their touch points are. So take, for example, an e-commerce site, right, where someone's going to purchase something or a service or a product, whether it's physical or a virtual thing that they will have and use. So we've identified for us there are 5 major types of behavior that customers have, but then there's 3 that we're working on because they seem to be the most popular just by numbered majority. And those are the people that are browsing for inspiration, browsing for research and comparison reasons, and ones that are more focused on buying, so they know kind of like what they want. So that's an additional layer on the expectations that customers have in terms of their mindset, which drives and decides what they decide to do in different moments. So on the PDP page, for example, or product detail page, where they can actually buy something or add it to cart, then they're deciding for themselves, is this what I want? And why do I want this? Am I engaged, or am I emotionally driven to buy this yet? And so that's what's kind of interesting for me, seeing the differences between one, just the layers of behavior or the moments in journey, but then what they're doing as a result and how that's affecting their decision making. So that's a great point you make, Andrea.
Thanks for that. And similarly, I sort of bring all of this in terms of the journey and the growth that we're seeing in social and apps in 3 categories. And it is just about what you said, that accessibility. How am I going to make this accessible to consumers? Discoverability, how when the consumer is engaging with my brand, are they able to learn even more or learn something that they didn't know coming in and truly be inspired? And then how do I deliver an experience for them that's credible? I think so often we're looking for authenticity. And I think when you bring these elements together, it's no surprise that in the B2B space, as we're seeing, the more consumerization of it, that people are looking for these things, and apps and social is really offering that to them. So yeah, I would agree, Desi.
That authenticity piece is just huge, right? Because it just comes screaming out when it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think it just plays so badly with consumers, and they see right through it. And so more and more authenticity is becoming, I guess, not just a consumer demand, but an expectation as well. And if you don't do it, then you're going to get called out for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point you mentioned, Darren, because technology has gone, especially over the last 2 years, has gone quite some way to helping organizations to start to make decisions that can be more proactive in answering that kind of need and creating the right kinds of solutions. But again, there's a lot of groundwork that goes into what the right solution really is for the customer, not necessarily for the business, or finding the right kind of balance, right? So that's another conversation entirely. So technology, what I've seen, especially the kinds of technology that we're considering right now for our migration from a monolithic architecture to a composable headless architecture, which is part of that process we're going through right now, is we are looking at platforms and solutions that will enable us to make sure that we keep all of our data as a central hub, which is the base model of a composable architecture, but then being able to, you could say, eject or distribute our content to any medium we want. So that would be apps, that would be kiosk, that would be websites, that would be different types of, you could say, endpoints, which the customer will be able to engage with. So that's a really good point you mentioned, Darren, as well, about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a separate webinar on authenticity as well as some examples of good and bad. But I'll stay with you, if I may, actually, because thinking about challenges between, I guess, UX professionals and UX teams and getting them to align content marketing strategy and user-first solutions versus data. It's kind of similar to the point we started talking about when we started the webinar. What's the challenges there?
Good question. So, how can I unpack this? So, what I've seen, Darren, in some organizations is where you could say, kind of going back to, it relates a little bit to, some of the earlier questions and discussions we've had just now, actually, because they all kind of connect, really, where you've got teams that have different levels of maturity, especially UX or design teams, where they will focus on, you could say, what they perceive to be the tangible aspects of the experience, the obvious ones. So the things that customers will see, like checkout and the product detail page and the home page, which is a very political page for many organizations, right? Perhaps not for Google, because your home pages is very simple, finely executed. But for most e-commerce pages, you've got all of this other stuff you've got to take into consideration, speaking about the brand and products and what's the balance, right? Versus content that customers want versus, what the business wants and their needs and so forth. But those teams will focus on that, which is a huge challenge, instead of kind of like missing out on things as usability. For example, site loading and the performance, site architecture, responsiveness, content readability, and other things of that nature. These are areas that are often neglected because they could be perceived as more background things, easy to miss, almost like that dust bunny that's under your rug, but you always miss it because you're hoovering the more obvious bits of the living room floor. kind of like that in that illustration. So that's kind of like what I've seen with teams that are fairly, that have that lower level of maturity, because they're not factoring in, as I mentioned earlier, being aware of the customer experience, all aspects and layers and details of it. Those are the main things. But here's the thing. All those things that I've mentioned, for me, I've learned over time that they really are the foundational elements of the experience, because if those things aren't resolved first, then when we start to try and focus on fixing the more obvious, tangible, visible aspects of an experience, we're kind of trying to fix something that's already on broken or weak architecture. The foundations are not right. So anything goes wrong up here, well, it's because down here is already broken, right? So you're trying to create something perfect or as close to on something that's not perfect at all. So it's always important to try and reverse engineer that. And that's the challenge I see in terms of how they can align the strategy of how they execute answering those things and aligning that with content marketing teams or content strategy or content strategic marketing teams, where they are trying to do one main thing, and that's balance the business needs of what the business wants to feed its customers and its fans versus what the customers expect to see at different moments of the journey. So yeah, it's I think that's probably how I would summarize it as a whole. I do have a few other thoughts, but I want to unpack those first.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. And I think, it's all about that. It's a similar subject to what we talked about right at the beginning. It's that clear, I guess, clarity between teams as well. And not running off in the football pitch in different directions, basically, when you're trying to score the same goal. But yeah, absolutely. Unpack further and we'll come back to you. Andrea, I'm going to stay with social media with you, if I may, as well. And why do you think social media is an effective marketing lever for B2B brands?
I think for a lot of what we've discussed, buyers are really bringing consumer expectations to their journey, and they're taking those journeys on behalf of their companies and marketers. And I think adapting to that shift is really important when we look at how other industries have leveraged these mediums to accelerate their business growth. And I think a perfect example, if I may, I could give just in terms of me. So Elena Kuzmarsky, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing her name, but she's the founder of Every Girl Media Group. And she's an editor, she's an influencer, and she recently remodeled her home. And I followed along for every part of the journey that she had there. And unexpectedly, I had to repair a wall in my home and repaint my entire living room pretty quickly. And I immediately referred to Elena's social media and knew that I wanted Sherwin-Williams paint in extra white with an eggshell finish on my walls. And without being the target audience for Sherwin-Williams, a premium paint brand, or speaking to any of their sales associates, I knew exactly what I wanted because I trusted Elena. And I'd never met Elena and really just considered her a part of my reach and my consumer journey. So here you have Sherwin-Williams meets Andrea Brown, and none of that happens without Elena. And I think that's the power of social.
What is it you trust? What was it you trusted?
I think there's just the credibility of her as an influencer, someone who is not necessarily in my space, but I trust her decisions. I trust the way that she thinks about what's important, what's valuable. And some of that really aligns and overlaps with what I think about in my own life. And so because of that, where a paint option from someone I've never met, simply painting their home and doing their remodeling, really aligned with me. And I felt that without ever seeing that color, I knew that because she is so thorough and because she really creates a community of other things that I align with, that I could probably value her decision on this paint color because I had sort of seen how thorough her process was. And so
she's an expert in her space, basically.
Yeah, she's an expert in her space, and certainly her space isn't construction or remodeling. It's, really writing about lifestyle and women's experiences, but I also trust her opinion on paint. And I think that really is the power of social.
It's like a combination, isn't it, of a believability, her expert status, and from the sound of it, authenticity as well?
1000%. Yeah, I would say so.
So it comes back to that A word as well. Are there other good examples you can give around sort of similar to what you just said, around another good example our audiences could look at?
In terms of just other influencers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Myleik Teele is another really great example of a social influencer. Gabby Gregg is another great example. Hayat Rita is another great example. These are all influencers who are really taking you into a glimpse of their lives, but they're using tech products. They're all building global brands. So when you think about the decisions they have to make, both personally and professionally, there is some credibility that comes with the decisions that they're making. And certainly it's not always as turnkey as it was with Elena, where I knew without a doubt I wanted this eggshell color of extra white, but I think it gives me more impetus to start to pursue some of the choices that I'm seeing them make. And like consumer buyers, I think B2B buyers are more informed than ever, most at least somewhat informed by the time they're reaching out to sales, because they're having these social engagements and they're finding different inputs as a part of their user journey. So they're turning to many sources of information along that journey. And I think particularly word of mouth and influencers are really emerging as super important as part of that purchase phase. So yeah, I would say that certainly works for me personally, but I'm starting to see that bleed into the B2B space and the consumerization that we're finding there.
You know, the audience was scribbling down all those influencer names as you were reading them off, right? Doing the same as well. So no,
I think that's a great point you made, Andrea, because we see within the world of e-commerce, as well as on social media as well, which are some of the channels that our organization is tapped into, is that social proofing works if it's executed in the right way. And a lot of that relates to kind of like creating, layers of loyalty, but brand trust. Brand trust could be believing in the brand of an individual, right? And then trusting what they say as a result of the fact that you bought into their brand and who they are, what they stand for. One example that comes to mind for me, I guess this is from a slightly more male perspective, is Dwayne Johnson, who has changed careers so many times, but has been able to find a formula to make that transition successful. So now someone like him, and there are many other examples out there, especially some of the great examples you've mentioned as well, Andrea, where they've been able to leverage that and either indirectly introduce some of their followers or fans or people that they're connected to other brands that they use, or introduce fans to their own brands. So, and that's a real example of the success of social proofing.
It's a really good point. Thank you, sir. And I'm going to come back to you as well, just around some of that relationship, if you like, miscom between teams. You said you wanted to unpack a few further thoughts, and I'm keen to know whether you've done that. I don't want to lose them.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I was thinking about, whilst Andrea was saying those nuggets of gold just there, was where there needs to be some kind of alignment review on a practical level, and then an overall level, there needs to be a process that makes sure that there is some kind of hybrid confederated way of working between the teams, not just the two teams of UX and marketing when it comes to aligning content marketing strategy and user-first solutions. Because remember, content marketing strategies are generally looking toward marketing teams for data. And remember, we talked about that layer of data is sometimes quite high, quite generalized, and it needs to be a lot more detailed, especially if you're going to say, right, what type of content should we serve our customers? And at what points is that content most relevant? And depending on the content, how can we pivot based on the environment around us to make sure that we are serving relevant, useful, helpful content? If it's helpful and useful and beneficial to the customer, they will come back for more. If it's not, they will probably start to look at what we produce or what you advertise or what you push out to the world, almost like banner blindness to a point. I've seen it before, not really useful, I'll scroll past it. And that's exactly how we behave when we look at banners on any website. I mean, that's an intrinsic truth. So we would never want our customers to start doing that, which is why it's important to have that kind of process where you have those layers of data aligned between the teams. So then those content strategy marketing teams can make a much more, you could say, refined and targeted, you could say, a plan that allows for enough flexibility to take into consideration unknown factors. And as we mentioned, we experienced an unknown factor that no one could control within the last 24 months. Yeah. So what it really does is just make sure that, as I said, those strategy teams all focused around content can balance properly corporate needs and user needs. In most cases, things generally side toward the corporate needs. If not, you could say managed or integrated or aligned well enough with customer or human behavior from a UX perspective.
Yeah, I think we can definitely classify a global pandemic as an unknown factor, don't you? Definitely. It's been a crazy 18 months, couple of years, and I'm sure there's still more of the ride to come yet. Andrea, coming to you, if retailers weren't doing digital well before, they've certainly been challenged to make it go better now, or start to rethink their strategy more towards digital in the light of the pandemic. What would your advice be around any retailers who are still assessing going digital?
I think it's ringing the alarm, right? The urgency is now, and I think it's for those same reasons, like
burning platform
that are accessible. Like, and digital really is the gateway to that accessibility. You now have your phones. I think when you look at mobile ad spending is projected to grow 37% in 2021, and that's compared to 17% growth for non-mobile. So we know that it's been the year of mobile for a decade now, but I think when you talk about accessibility and the need to be able to have things at your fingertip, like the retail experience, like you find in the retail experience, it's a no-brainer that you really need to start shifting to mobile and app in particular, which is, depending on your app and the UX design, there is even more of a strong environment where you're able to navigate seamlessly and you're able to sort of understand and discover new experiences with that brand as well.
So your advice in essence would be to retailers still considering it, the time is now. Yeah, and I often say to my customers, you know, as you're often, everyone wants that data point, everyone wants to prove it out, but you have to begin to get into this environment where you're testing and learning and iterating. By the time all of the data is ready for you to digest, there's new data, there's a new way to respond to what's happening, and so you've already missed the boat. So it's so critical, even if you have apprehension, start to test.
take a look at that, optimize in real time, and then start to iterate from there. But to really take a quarter or a month even to assess and then start to make a decision, you've already missed the boat, in my opinion.
We were discussing on an earlier panel actually about, you know, the amount of work that goes into garnering data and insights. And then all of that work sometimes goes to waste because then nothing happens with it, or we sit on it or procrastinate with it for ages. And then it becomes out of date insight and data anyway. And then you have to sort of start the process all over again. It's kind of this perpetual onslaught of data that you never really do anything with.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Desi, do you want to add to any of that?
I did have a thought actually, and I think that Andrea.
Share your thoughts, share them.
I think Andrea made an excellent point with regards to kind of like how the time is now. The one thing that I would always, recommend to add to such a good point is that make sure that your foundations are clean. Get a view of the customer, and make sure that there is one version of the truth of that customer. If there are multiple versions, you're going to be making random decisions, just like different players running around the football pitch trying to score the same goal, not quite working, to coin onto your really good illustration, Darren. But when you can align with one version of the truth, and then you can have that, you could say, lean approach of how you iterate and deliver to customers, then you are able to be a lot more proactive and change your deliverable, change your solution, or just change and enhance aspects of the experience, which will then create different types or kinds of emotions at different levels for customers. All of that stuff is measurable. Absolutely, it's measurable with the technology we have today. So if we're not buying into that, and it's affordable, we don't have to go full scale in order to get some of that information, especially to begin with. So regardless of the size of the organization, if you're thinking about it, if you don't go into that kind of like digital realm, then your business kind of stays local. And if that's what the goal is, that's okay. But in order for it to really touch more people that you don't know, instead of people in your town or neighborhood, then you really want to consider going digital, making sure you have a view of that customer, but from that single version, which enables you to make quick decisions based on data that you can trust.
Here's a weird one. How do you know that single view of the customer is the right one?
Oh, that's a great question. Great question. And actually, I had this challenge no less than 3 weeks ago. and that was because again, there was a misalignment before we started talking about how do we create a process where we can make sure that there is one version. A lot of it comes down to triangulation and where the data originally comes from. So some of it means you have to work backwards just a bit, just to work out, well, this is great data, but where did it come from? And where did that come from? And where did that come from? And we generally end up finding that there is one source, but there had been different layers and different ways in which that data had been delivered. Especially where there's data where you've got layers of human interaction, you introduce margins of error because we're human and we all make mistakes. I think even just in the process of our conversation today, I've probably made at least 10 linguistical errors, I'm sure, but that's because we're human, right? So imagine if that can happen over a short period of time, then imagine what that can do when we try to apply that to rows and rows and complex layers of data to try and deliver that to someone else further down the funnel. So that's where kind of like we start to see how data starts to spike off, and you've got these different branches of data, and like you said, none of them really align. It's really about working backwards, finding the source, and then agreeing on the source that we all work with, and agreeing on the process and methods we use to deliver that source of truth.
Andrea, have you got anything to add to this as well? I mean, that's that single view of the customer. What's your view, excuse the pun, in terms of where companies get that right or wrong?
Well, I think it's breaking down those silos, and really a lot of what Desi was speaking about early on, and even just then, in terms of the partnerships that we're seeing from the marketing org, from the analytics team, and really looking at everything holistically. So often we're sort of heads down in sort of our function and solving for what is a priority to us. And I think sort of really bringing those silos down and having a holistic conversation about who this customer is, what does success look like, what are we measuring, how are we measuring, what is the accuracy of that measurement, and maybe even some flexibility, what is the range of that success? So rather than anchoring to one number or one point of, yep, this was a huge success, what is the range and what are the factors that go into that range to determine whether something was successful? So not to belabor, but I would just, that would, I think, be the only thing I would add there, in that we really have to begin to break down the silos, keep those silos, keep those silos apart and really unify the conversation in a way that I don't know that we're doing as much. We're moving towards that direction, but really getting into a healthy habit of really consulting cross-functionally to solve for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. In terms of sort of, I guess, further examples and a slightly different tack, have you both got an example of where customer data has been used brilliantly to absolutely drive engagement? There's an intrinsic link between the two. Have you got an example that you could share, either from your own careers, your own businesses, or other businesses that you've seen?
I can give one example from a time back in my career. I know so often on the retail side, you have a sense of, for example, thinking about like the telecom industry and how very often people are upgrading their phones. And there is also a natural ability with some retail sites where people are going and they're selling their phones, like, oh, I don't need this phone anymore, I'm going to sell this phone and I'm going to purchase a new phone. And I think really leveraging the data to understand what is the customer journey around getting a new plan and getting a new phone. And we were able to really have a conversation with retail, with this retail site and with the telecom advertisers to say, we understand from a retail perspective that's not telecom based your journey. And we have consumers who both are looking to change a plan. We sort of know how long that takes. And so they're probably in the fold there. And so you have an opportunity now to reach people who are buying maybe old phones and are looking for a plan, and people who are looking to upgrade their phones. And so it really helped to evolve the marketing conversation we were having, because it was rooted in that data of knowing our consumers very well, but also understanding the consumer journey of the telecom industry.
Thank you. That's a great example. Desi?
Yeah, and I have a similar one as well, where I'd worked for a institutionalized fashion brand, been around for over 200 years, that brand was. So they were very well known across the UK and many parts of the world. But when they had produced a lot of their in-house fashion for their end users, for their customers, it was very much product focused. So one of the things that we were tasked with is to try and work out, well, every time they, you could say release, you could say a new line of fashion wares, why were the releases so unpredictable in terms of which one will be successful, which ones were not, and how do we accurately start to measure that a bit better, because they never really had a process of how they do that. So again, product focused, not user focused. So one of the things that we started to do was understand that we needed to conduct various different, you could say, exercises, test activities, in order to try and reach out to, contact the customer, things like field studies, watch, analyze, and kind of like, record a lot of that data with regards to how the customer behaved, what they did, what they thought, and what they said, and what they didn't say as well as what they think. There are 3 layers. It sounds the same, but it's not, not from a UX scientific perspective. And that really helped us to understand, just like what Andrea mentioned, was that there's actually a different journey for the customer. Some of those customers transferred a lot of their thinking, behavior, and their journey interaction between the tactile and digital worlds. And so they were viewing and looking at images or products in a different way. But the problem was that because they were product focused, the organization had an idea of how they wanted to show the images in every facet, in both worlds. But actually, because the expectations were different, we were able to surface that we needed to be able to show the products in different ways, for those customers who had different expectations because of the environments they were now interacting with, digital and physical, the tactile world. And that greatly increased things in terms of the sales and those things, and the actual, you could say, popularity of the internal brand clothesline. So that worked out really well for the organization in that respect. And that meant that we're able to start to create and to suggest and push other things, such as key performance indicators, KPIs, ways in which we can measure perpetual success and try and build on what we had done before, and then identify where we're failing and what we're not doing, for that line of the business. So that's just an example of how UX and that methodology of user first applied to a completely different stream within the business. But again, the principle of focusing on customers first and then behavior really kind of like won the day.
Thank you so much, sir. Our audience is still with us, by the way. So thank you for sticking with us, particularly on the last shift of the day. So clearly they like what they're hearing, but they're very quiet. They haven't asked any questions. So clearly they're a shy bunch today. But believe it or not, we've been talking for 40 minutes. So we need to start wrapping things up, because the program is running out of time. So what I'd like you both to do is to share some closing pearls of wisdom, if possible, please, with our audience that have stayed with us for the last 40 minutes. So around this whole subject of UX and data-driven decision-making, anything that you'd like to leave our audience with on any of this subject? I know it's a wide subject, it's a wide question, but yeah, what would be your golden parting words? Over to you first, Andrea.
My takeaway would just be that, as B2B marketers, we really must deliver content and experiences that match what people have come to experience and expect in their personal lives. I cannot reiterate that enough. We are seeing the consumerization in B2B marketing. We're already starting to see B2B marketers increase their focus areas in social and app. I talked about the mobile investment on the social side. We're seeing 68% really thinking and rethinking about their plan to increase spend on social strategies. So I would just implore you all to think about, even if you're not ready to go full force, think about testing in these areas and starting to see the value of those truly authentic experiences that you might not be able to get through more traditional marketing, using that and leveraging it as a complement to the growth and the shift that we're seeing in this industry. And I'm sure you'll find success. I'm really excited personally about the future of B2B marketing, and really appreciate your time, Darren and Desi, and all of you all for really engaging and listening to the conversation today. Feel free to reach out to me.
Andrea, thank you as well, particularly with the backdrop of your disruption in the last 24 hours. So have a safe trip back to San Francisco tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fabulous to hear from you. Desi, wrap this thing up for us, please.
Yes, it would be my pleasure. Well, first of all, before I kind of like convey my thoughts, a massive hello and shout out to Patrick in Australia, who loves Victorinox products, and I know is logged in and is a participant on the call today. So yeah, keep grabbing our products. Lots of great stuff coming out. Excited that you're on board and that you love our products. So good job, mate. Nice one. Now, thinking about kind of like, final thoughts for me is really the importance of making sure that we be data aware or consumer aware. That's probably one of the most important things that you could say I've learned over, you could say, the various different years in different organizations. When we become focused, for example, data focused or user focused or design focused, is that we may look at and test the button. Is it too big? Is it too small? Is it the right color? What's the psychology of color with customers and users? How do we, as a human standpoint, interpret that in our minds? We already know the power of color and what it can do, right? So there's a science to it. We know that. However, that's being focused. Someone who's somewhere in between that is somebody who may test the button, but then see how that reacts and interacts and intersects with other elements of the page. They may see how that changes the analytics and perhaps the attractiveness of perhaps a hero banner or a form, perhaps that button is attached to as part of a larger organism, right? But then being data aware makes you stand back, as we've been talking about, be contextual in our understanding of the customer experience. What does that change do to someone who perhaps, if they're in an e-commerce experience, what does that change do in helping them decide what their average or their value is? How many items per bag end up in their bag as a result of that? Is this color detracting? Is it distracting? Does it mean that they are interpreting the levels of content on that page differently in a different order? So now what we want to communicate, we cannot because it's in the wrong order. So the customers, that what the information is not resonating in the right way. So whether it's a digital solution, a physical solution, an app, B2B, excellently covered by Andrea. And a lot of those behaviors and expectations are very similar in the B2C world, right? We have to deliver what the customers expect and what they're looking for. And we have the capability to do that. We just have to make sure that when we do that, we are focusing on the awareness of the experience and not just a moment in the journey for them.
Thank you so much, as always, Desi. I think we've done 2 or 3 of these panels together now, and your insights are always so compelling. So thank you, and come back again soon. That's a wrap. What a way to go out with our terrific twosome. See, I promised you they'd be good, and they have been, so more than good. Fantastic, brilliantly explained. Quite a complex subject, but with such enthusiasm as well. So thank you. The recording of this will be available to watch on YouTube and also shared on LinkedIn later on as well. So you can catch it again or share it with your colleagues and friends as well. That's it for the day in terms of the Retail Bulletin. We've just delivered 4 brilliant events. Come back and see us on Tuesday, 28th of September for the Future of the High Street debate. We've got 3 really interesting panels discussing that physical versus digital piece, and is there a place for the high street in our country? And I have a very clear view on that, so it's going to be a really exciting one to moderate. So thank you, Desi and Andrea, and to the Retail Bulletin as well. That's a wrap. We are done, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening. All the best.
Thank you.